Hi, I'm Meta Spencer. I'm in Toronto, and this time I'm going to talk to another person in Toronto. He's an old friend, Eric Wahlberg. I haven't seen much of Eric over the last years, but I've known him a long time. I think we met back in the early 80s during the Cold War and during the disarmament movement of those days, and we were both very active. Not necessarily on the same team in some ways. So we have had our issues over the years, and I don't think that is going to come up too much now because we moved into what he calls a postmodern age, and something about we're talking about some imperialism of today, which sounds like exactly the way he would think. Yeah, imperial. He was an anti-imperialist even in the old days. Okay, good morning, Eric. How are you?
Fine, thank you, Meta.
Great to see you again.
And my thanks to you. I remember you were my first journal that sponsored me as a correspondent to get me my visa in Uzbekistan back in 1993. I think it was.
Well, that's exactly what we should do is talk a little bit about your career line, because it's been an amazingly zigzaggy kind of trajectory.
Well, I don't know. I think it's been like this. I think it's in the straight, but it might look like that.
Yeah, well, geographically, it's unusual, yes. And it's also unusual, I think, in the fact that you have mastered two languages, which I think are, for most of us, absolutely impossible. I would never attempt. I have attempted to learn Russian, and I lasted 1 week, gave up, and then you went on and actually learned Arabic too. Mm-hmm. So anybody a Canadian who does that has to get a few gold stars for at least effort, and for more than effort, because you've been a writer and you've produced. I think there's a list of about 4 books.
Four books.
Yeah. And all about international affairs and so on. That you lived in Uzbekistan, and then you lived in Cairo.
I began my political life journey at Cambridge back in 73 to 75, where I studied economics, and I fell in love with the Soviet Union. This was probably the best time to think about the Soviet Union. Was Vietnam. I remember toasting with my radical friends at the library on May 1st, 1975. We were toasting the victory of Vietnam against imperialism. So that was the first great moment. I could see right then that Vietnam wouldn't have survived. China wouldn't have survived the communists there, for better or for worse, without the Soviet Union backing it the whole way. So I realized that Stalin and all that's very bad, but I could see I would say I could see beyond that kind of surface of grimness. An interesting kind of postmodern thing too, that so much that we see is through our own eyes, and we're projecting ourselves.
Okay, I don't want to dwell on this, but I do want to clarify or explore your use of the term postmodern, because I always think of postmodern, really, they talk of postmodernism as a way of doing analysis that I think is basically, not to be too reductionist, but really kind of cultural relativism.
Yes.
Yeah. And 2 of your books have the title postmodern.
Yes. Okay. Well, perhaps I could. My point in using this term postmodernism is that it's relativism, cultural relativism, so that there's no good and bad. Everything's relative. You might think it's good. I think it's bad. We're all happy. There's no idea of something's better. And I think that socialism is better than capitalism. I think that we need a moral basis in our society. Not all moral views are equally valid. So I'm more of a modernist, you could say, which is actually, you could say, a little bit reactionary, because I stand by fundamental truths. I believe some things are good and bad, and I think you should fight for what's good. I think.
Well, I do too, but we fight for opposite things.
Well, I don't think we fight for opposite things always. I
No,
mean, we
no,
are both.
I'm playing with the idea,
Yeah.
but also you just what I think you've done is just negated the title of your book, because what I was reading is that the title of your book two of them seemed to proclaim an orientation that's culturally relativistic.
Really?
Well, we need to talk about postmodern and and imperialism. You gave me the idea you were espousing postmodernism, and I thought, well, I'm surprised.
Oh no, I'm not. I'm critiquing it. Postmodern imperialism being imperialism in the old sense, British imperialism. You take your guns and you go and mow down anyone in your way, and you say, "I am good. I am better than you." That's modernism. Postmodern imperialism says, "Oh, you've got nice little customs, and that's fine, and just let us come in and trade, and we'll be nice with you, and we'll show you our good, and you can decide if you like it or not." It's this kind. That's the cultural relativism that looks like it's not imperialism. The U.S. Famously, Bush famously said, "Some people are calling us imperialists. We're not imperialists at all." This is Bush after invading Iraq. He says, "We're not imperialists." I mean, but he can say that because he's thinking in the terms that, okay, Britain was imperialist because it had a lot of guns. Well, of course, the U.S., it's become more and more classically classically imperialist as it's invaded country after country. But in the 1990s, it was portraying itself as this new Michael Ignatieff famously talks about good imperialism, that human rights imperialism is good imperialism, which you might agree with. I mean, I was just watching something last night where the British historian was saying human rights imperialism is good imperialism. It's the best imperialism we have. And I thought when he said this, I said, maybe we don't need any imperialism at all. Maybe the best imperialism is still worse than a non-imperialist world order.
I don't know where I'd stand on that, except to say that the notion of imperialism implies the existence of an empire to be expansionist. And
that's true.
And it's certainly, I'm not in favor of any empires, but a lot of difference that makes, whether I like it or not.
Yes, that's. In fact, I was just writing today with a delightful friend that I worked with in Cairo. Mel Frickberg. She is a Swedish, like me, background, but Australian. And so I was writing her, and I just mentioned about Taliban. I said, I know what you're going to say about Taliban and women and that, but can you at least acknowledge that it was a victory against American imperialism? It wasn't the end of American imperialism, but it was a victory. And she wrote back, and I've had other women, and perhaps you're going to be the same position, say, no, it was bad. The U.S. They should have kept their government the way it was, even though it was U.S. backed. It was good for women, and Taliban are bad for women. So the Taliban are bad. And I thought, oh yeah, you can't pick your revolutions. Sorry, Mel. And maybe I'd have to say sorry to you and sorry to I've talked to other lefties here in Toronto, and they're appalled that I could see this as a victory at all. Whereas they say, no, it's worse. And I think, we're never going to get anywhere if you can't face up. Like you're saying, we have to accept reality. We can't just whine about things. We have to deal with the reality that we have. So that's, and I would defend myself all through my life. Defending the Soviet Union, I was defending the main force for peace in the world, right from 1917, right through to the end. Now you would probably disagree with that, but that's the way I saw it. That it was against war, it was against armaments, it was dragged into the arms race. That's my kind of view that, so I would defend the Taliban. That they're not an aggressive. Soviet Union was never aggressive to attack other countries. It was invaded, and that's why it was. A lot of the reasons that it was so dour looking and
well, yes, but the Soviet
harsh
Union, but the Soviet Union did invade Afghanistan, you know.
Oh, okay. Well, so shall we spend the rest of our talk about Afghanistan? Because
Well,
it
I
didn't intend to. In 78, the communists in Afghanistan, they said, oh, they see Russia, they'd all been trained there, and they said, oh, Russia will help us. Let's have this coup, and then we'll invite the Russians in. That was the scenario. And so once they had done that, what was Russia supposed to do? Is just say, no, we're not going to help you. You can just go to hell, and you can let U.S. backed Taliban. It wasn't the Taliban, then it was the Mujahideen, which were worse than the Taliban. So the U.S. let them destroy everything, which eventually the U.S. backed Mujahideen did after 10 years of, and then we were left with this horrible situation. So I stand by, and I was defending that situation back in 79, and people of nice people like you were laughing at me saying, how can you defend the Soviet Union for what it's doing? I tried to explain, they just turned the other way and walked away as if they know the best, and the Soviet Union was awful. And I'm sorry, the Soviet Union was right to help them, and it was a tragedy that Bush in 88, when Najibullah was there and there was still something left of that secular women with no hijabs, education, the whole works, when that was still in place, Gorbachev pleaded with Bush. He said, look what I've given you. I've given you all this disarmament. I've let well, this is 88. So the West Eastern Europe hadn't collapsed yet, but it was in the works. He said, look what I'm doing. I'm basically dismantling communism. Help us save the secular regime in Afghanistan. If you don't, it'll be hell. And what did Bush do? Just ignore them. Just walk the other way. You're bad, we're good. And look at what Bush ended up turning Afghanistan into. Horrible. It's a nightmare, and it's still a nightmare today, but we've got to deal with it. And that's why I would critically defend the Taliban. And I would say that people like us should be helping them and not telling them what to do. We should be giving them food so their people don't starve to death. And we should pray that they'll be grateful and that they won't see us as the heathen and the horrible enemy, that they see us as friends. And I think already Russia and China are doing that. They've got their own agendas, I realize, but they're not dumping. We can't dump on the Taliban now. We've got to try and deal with them. Can you not? You can't agree with that? I mean, we've got no other choice. What are you going to do?
In a way, you're right. But it's a question of what aspects of their policies you want to support.
I don't care what we support. They could give. They're saying this to us. So you don't tell people you've got to be nice to women because we say so. They're not gonna pay attention to that. They're going to be more and more angry at you for trying to tell them what to do. You got to just it's like having a teenage child. You don't tell them you've got to be in by 8 o'clock tonight or else. And what they're going to do, they're just going to flaunt you. They're going to go away and do what they want. You can't deal in human relations from a position of power and force. That's not going to get you anywhere with the Taliban.
Well, certainly they tried power and force and certainly lost. You're right on that. So that was a lesson to be learned. But then the question is, if you really want to have any influence on, for example, the rights of girls.
They know what you say. They've heard it a million times. You don't have to keep telling them what you want. They know it. So just back off and let them develop and see if they... all we can do is just help them so that they don't, these poor Afghan girls that we're so worried about, they're starving to death now. That's what the situation is. Whether or not they have nice education the way we like it without hijabs, that's got nothing to do with reality. what the reality is, they're starving, and we've got to help them from being starving to death. They've got no hospitals. They've got everything's been destroyed. We got to go in and help them, and that's all we can do. Give, to be good and to love and to hope that your enemy doesn't kill you. So I don't know. You got me. We get talking about Afghanistan, and I get very emotional because it's 40 years. I've been working on Afghanistan since it started in '78. I remember when the Hulk or whatever their Communist Party is called came to power, and I thought, oh, hey, this is good. This is a revolution. This is secularism for the Afghans. And then I just saw it go down and down and down. And now I see it a little bit going up, but it's not there, but it's better than it was a month ago, 2 months ago. But you would say it's worse than it was 2 months ago.
I don't know what I would say. No, actually, it was terrible 2 months ago, and it's terrible now.
Yeah.
And it's been in the pits for, I don't know, maybe
for 40 years.
Before I was born, really. And I'm 90. So it's been, there have been problems.
It was good in the 60s.
But no, the question, I guess, is I have the feeling we are reenacting a debate that we fought about the Soviet Union, because our conflict in those days was, I felt that my fundamental loyalty had to be with people who believed in democracy and human rights. And therefore, I was very supportive to people who wanted real changes in the Soviet system. And I made friends with dissidents, and I did what I could to help them, which put me in very bad standing with people in the Canadian Peace Congress and that group, which I think you were part of. And in those days, we would fight about whether or not, for the sake of peace, we should support anything and everything that the Soviet government did without criticism, or whether or not, to be really having kind of integrity to our own values, we should support them, the Soviet policies, wherever we could find a common ground, but also be very frank about criticism where we didn't have common ground. And that was my position. So I hear you saying pretty much the same thing, that we have to support the Taliban, where I'm saying we have to do what we can to support the human rights of people who may be vulnerable now. And of course, we want to support the Taliban insofar as we can find any common ground for mutual cooperation. But we can't do so at the expense of the people who are extremely vulnerable and are being really repressed by the regime.
Okay, well, I agree with you there that we should have, in terms of the Canadian Peace Congress, I have my own issues there too. They don't see me as any because I don't just follow blindly whatever Soviet Union does, or I have my own opinions, but I don't, in terms of the Soviet Union, when it existed, I tried to, I always supported the good things that they advocated, but I kept quiet about. I didn't start saying, "Oh, I think Sinyavsky's good, and you should leave him out of jail, and you should be nice to this person, that person," because I knew that wouldn't have any effect. That would just turn them against me. So I just kept quiet. And it's the same about the Taliban. I support them wherever I like what they're doing, which is overthrowing U.S. government. Apparently, they want to put limits on wealth, that you shouldn't be able to come. Money isn't the controlling factor for them. They don't want to let people become wildly wealthy like you get in the West, and like happened under Ghani, where the money was just spirited away. They have a sense of what I would call socialism, but you could call it feudalism, or you could call it Islamic Sharia, if you want. I mean, you could call it whatever you like, but so I think that's good. The
first time I ever heard people equating Islamic socialism, Sharia, with socialism and feudalism, and they're all the same.
Okay, well, you should read a little bit of my writings then, because that's what my first book was really about, was going from the communism, then it collapses, and the only force against imperialism now is Islam. The only really strong force in the world today is Islam. I can't. If you can tell me another force that's strong that's fighting imperialism, please tell me. But I don't think there is. So that's my first book. My second book, From Postmodernism to Post-Secularism, is looking how the commonalities between Islam and Sharia and other forms of government, in particular socialism. There are a lot of things about Islamic economics that jive. In the first place, it forbids usury. And Christianity used to forbid usury, and then by the 19th century, the Catholic Church is pushed, it's becoming less of a force, of a moral force, and it accepts usury and interest. And now we are basically a nation, a society that's totally controlled by this whole business of making money on itself, which in Sharia, which Muhammad made very clear, that is haram. That is what do you call it? Apostasy, to think that money can create. The only creative force is God. It's not money. So that's where we get to socialism and Sharia. But the other thing about the Taliban, I would say, they know what you think about women, and they have their own views. So you're not going to convince them by just continually harping and by saying we're going to boycott, we're going to embargo you, we're going to starve you into submission. That doesn't work with Iran. That doesn't work with Russia. It doesn't work with China. It doesn't work with anybody. It doesn't work with Venezuela. You could try and force them and say you're horrible. We're going to starve you and you're going to collapse. That's just, if you believe in your revolution, you're going to keep fighting. If you believe in Islam, you're going to fight because it's the infidel that's the enemy that is trying to force their views and their opinions onto you. So I would say get rid of that kind of whiny telling them what to do. Just help them so that the people don't starve. And that was always, I think of the 1920s when the Soviet Union, there was massive famine, and a lot of it was due to the mismanagement and that. But Hoover was able to mobilize just to save the people from starving to death. And I think that was the most beautiful move. And that was maybe one of the last beautiful things that the US did. And Hoover got a lot of backlash for doing that. If you read that whole episode is fascinating, how through the Red Cross he was conservative, he was Republican, he wasn't no communist, but he saw the need to save the people and he helped them. And Lenin was against this whole thing. He didn't want to let Hoover and Westerners come in and start. But the Westerners, Hoover didn't try and force anything. They just gave and they made sure the people got it. That was the bottom line on Hoover's support, and I forget what it was called, the American Relief Administration. That we want to control how the resources, the food is distributed, and they were there. It's fascinating to read because.
Okay, Eric. Now look, you notice I'm not resisting your last little commentaries, which are about be helpful and try to support the poor in
all we can do
wherever they are. No, that's not all we can do, because where we don't, we pretty well agree on that. What we disagree about, I think, is that you want to treat the regime in whatever state we're talking about, whether it's Venezuela or Soviet Union in those days, the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, or China, or the government of Afghanistan and so on. Treat them as the outfit that we must support because they know what they want to do and we can't make any difference.
They're the power.
Well, wait.
We have to
finish.
Okay.
Within each of these states, and even within the ruling group within these states, there are always factions that disapprove of what they're saying, oppose them, and want to change. And so the question is, don't treat, in my opinion, you don't treat the regime as if it's a forever solid entity, but you need to look at the various interests
Actions.
within the state
Yeah.
that need support. So you say, well, the government knows that they our opinion of women, but they're going to go on and do what they please. Well, yes, but there are women there, and they count too. And my loyalty is with those women, and not with necessarily with the state and with the children and so on. And that's not in opposition to your notion that, of course, we want to provide funding for their food and whatever needs to be met. But the same was the case in the Soviet Union. You said you got to support the regime. Well, I was meeting.
You have to respect the regime. You're not supporting it. You're respecting them as the government that is the government of that country. And you don't go in and say, well, we like those women over there, we're going to give them money. And maybe they don't like the regime and maybe they're going to try and overthrow it. That's what you see when you start to get in and play factions one against the other, say we like these people in your regime, we don't like those people. That doesn't work.
Eric,
that's not playing fair.
I got deported from the Soviet Union because I hung out with dissidents and they didn't like it.
What year was that?
That in around 85, I don't know. But they threw me out because I did support the dissidents. And not only did I support the dissidents, but the people who are high-level people that I was brought there to engage in discourse with, the people who are very influential and top people in the Communist Party, they would say one thing at the meetings, and then 2 minutes later, when we break for coffee, they'd say, "Go ahead, that's just great. We want you to talk that way. Please keep it up." And what I'm saying is, within the party at that time, I already saw the people who became Gorbachev's supporters. Gorbachev was their man. At that point, I don't think they had identified him as their man, but he became the leader of this faction, which in fact was there already. And therefore, if I just supported their official position at the table, I would be doing what you want me to do, but that's not what I did. I was polite to them, and I was not rude to them. But I also pointed out that there were other things that they would help a lot if they would pay attention to, such as human rights. And they wanted me to say that. And when I would come back, I would come to Toronto, and the Canadian Peace Congress people would jump all over me because they say you should have never criticized people. I got thrown out of the Toronto Volgograd initiative. I was actually elected because I was favoring things like signing the petition, which was being circulated in Nathan Phillips Square on behalf of Sakharov. And they said, you would never get anywhere doing that. Shame on you. They threw me out.
Well, what was it that got you thrown out of the Soviet Union? Can you tell me the exact?
Exactly. I took along some copies of the Canadian magazine that I was at that time involved with, the Peace Calendar. It didn't exist as a magazine yet. It was like a newspaper. Yeah. And there had been some dissidents who had left the Soviet Union and had visited Toronto, 3 or 4 of them, and had given speeches. And so there had been a big meeting in Toronto, and we had on the front page of this Peace Calendar, I had printed pictures of these people and an analysis of the speeches that they had given. And at the lunchtime, in the meeting that I was invited to, and my way was paid by the Soviet Union, the Soviet Peace I handed out 20 or 30 copies of the Peace Calendar to people at lunch. So I was immediately summoned by the KGB to a special room and interrogated for 2 or 3 hours. And then I was told basically to get out.
Okay, do you think that your action actually helped anybody or promoted peace in any real way? Do you think that that specific action? No, I mean,
yes. I will tell you why. There was a woman named Olga Medvedkova who was pregnant, and she was she was put on trial, charged with assaulting a police officer. This woman weighed 90 pounds, but she was pregnant at the time. and would not have assaulted anybody under any
Yeah.
circumstances. But
Okay.
she was on trial, and I was in touch with Pierre Trudeau and his office, a guy named David Crenna, who was his assistant, and I was invited to lunch at the the place I've forgotten on Sussex Drive, wherever Trudeau lived, and with a bunch of other Peaceniks. And I talked a little bit about Olga and her plight, and they sent people to her trial, and she got off. The first time that anybody had ever been expelled, they didn't keep her, they didn't charge her anymore. They let her off for the first time in just any time that a dissident had not been. She was going to be sent to a gulag. So she and her husband and children and her parents were expelled, and they live in Ohio now. She's a very dear friend, and she would say that I had helped save her life. Now you can ask her. Yes, I did do something of some value, and it was worthwhile. And I am now clearly in touch with people who were at that point very close to Gorbachev, people who were his very most intimate assistants and aides, and remain so even to this day. And they would say that I'm a dear friend. So yes, I had some influence, and not
because
the course of history, but I would defend the position that I took, which was, I think, one with integrity, where you stand up for the people you think are right, no matter what government they are living under.
Well, okay, I suppose if I had been in that situation, I wouldn't have distributed that publicly at a meeting. I would have talked to people, just as you said, be outside the meeting, where you could talk about things freely, as on one-on-one basis, rather than, I would say that officially I wouldn't do things, because I was invited there at the behest of the Soviet, whatever, Peace Committee. So that's different. But I'm surprised that if it's 85, that already things were really loosening up. I can't imagine that she would have spent very long. I don't know what this was, 85, so this is.
Oh yeah, look, I'm sorry. My memory for numbers and dates is always unreliable.
Well, if it's Gorbachev, it can't be any. It's 86, I would think. He just came to power in 85. And he was already.
It probably was later than 85.
Yeah, I think 86. So already, I'm surprised that you would have been kicked out, but. I can see that, there were factions there, and in a way you were playing one faction against another, because she ended up getting off. So that's interesting. You got involved in what was going on, which was a real kind of power struggle. So
I don't want to listen. I made it sound like I'm a great hero. It didn't have. I didn't have that much influence.
Yeah.
Actually, the people who had the more influence, I believe, were the Brits, because several governments sent observers to her trial, and actually were so the Canadian government was active, but not the main one, nor do I claim that Spencer did it. But I did organize a big demonstration on Queen's Park, in the front of Queen's Park, and had a lot for her. I was on the press every day of the week.
Good for you.
Wow. Promoting her cause and saying that we have to defend people like that. Yeah.
Well, I think that the fact that states, see, this is where we get into diplomacy and the role of people to people versus state. And as you said, it was the British state and the Canadian and I was French or whatever that came to her trial and pressed. And so they, from an official position, were coming in and putting pressure on the state. So they were respecting the Soviet state, but they were acting in their official capacity to protest. So, and that worked, and she got off. So I think it's the same with the Taliban. We can't go in and behind their back, or we can't go to a meeting that they invite us to and start distributing our own propaganda. What we have to do is, as the Canadian state has to recognize, this is what important, we should be lobbying now for the Canadian government to recognize the Taliban as the official government as soon as possible, so that they can come in and there's a state to state start to influence them, and that we as NGOs, as people can, all we can do is just try and help the people to survive. I'll stand by that. We shouldn't go in and tell them what to do. The state can provide some kind of a pressure, and if they want, they can embargo. And well, I'm sure right now all their funds are seized by the U.S., so they're completely helpless. And do you think that they're going to stop? No, they're not going to let the U.S. tell them. They just won 20 years of struggle against the U.S. I think they're going to come with their tail between their legs and start to plead and say, oh, we'll do this if you do that. No, that's not the way things are going to improve. I want to see things improve. And I just don't see little...
What makes you think that anything that you can do one way or another is going to influence them in how they treat people who disagree with them? They don't allow people to even play music. Now, if you oppose music, and I'm not a musician, but yes. I'm all in favor of people who
I think you're exaggerating. Whereas yes, I've heard this. I've heard that in the old days they banned music, and that was horrible. And now they came in and they heard music on the street and they ripped the cassette out and threw it away. But that's, again, public versus private. Even Khomeini did not like Ayatollah Khomeini. I've been reading about him recently, his personal, about his family life. And apparently he told his daughters, he had 3 daughters, he told them on a one-to-one basis, he would listen to music with them. But officially, publicly, it was haram. Because, and there's a whole theology behind that. I don't want to get into that, about the effect of music, how it can be sensual and all that. That's what in the back of the Taliban's mind. But so I'm sure that if it's private, you can have music, but you just don't start to have that. I'm trying to think like them, because I want to understand how they think so that we can deal with them. And that's the only way we can do it. Maybe that's the good thing about postmodernism, is that you want to get in to the way other people think, that it's important. You don't just, like the modernists, you don't say, I'm going to invade and destroy unless you do. You don't do that. What you have to do is have to understand your supposed enemy and try and work with him. And
tell me a case where that has worked. By going along with the powers that be and not challenging them, how do you think you're going to make any impact? And I assume that you simply don't care about the victimization or the people that they're oppressing. If you're allowing them to continue doing it and you don't speak up, I don't have any use for the morality of that. I'm sorry.
Well, I don't. I care very much that they don't starve to death. That's number one. I have priorities. This is my modernist thinking. There are things that are more important than others. Survival is important. Health is important. Jobs, and then we get down to the nitty gritty of this, women's rights and men's rights. The first rights are a right to survive. And the right.
Now, what I hear you saying is we should provide all the food that we can, and then step back and allow the people who are in power to do any damn thing they please without making any commentary about it, because that's what you say. That's our only responsibility. I'm sorry, but we have to defend and stand up for what we consider our own values.
Well, okay, but I still think that's the role of the state. That's our state, presumably reflects our moral values.
Well, it doesn't necessarily, we've talked about how our state is not doing the right thing.
Right.
There's certainly been the foreign policies and military and with respect to nuclear weapons, et cetera, all of that, they're absolutely the wrong.
Terrible.
We know that 80% of the Canadian population would like to have nuclear disarmament globally. And how many even times in any of the recent elections, there was no discussion of that. Right. All they talk about is healthcare and childcare and things like that. They don't talk even about the things that are, to my mind, really important. So how do I stand up for the things that I think are really important?
Well, okay, we can support our state when they say the right things. They say the right things about women's rights. So we can support our state on women's rights and say, go and really you work to try and state to state policy. If you want recognition, Taliban, you've got to do this. And if you want our state to acknowledge you, you've got to do this. I mean, that's on a person to person level. I think we shouldn't be trying to do what a state should be doing. And you talk about whether or not I stand up against the state when it doesn't do what I want to do. I stand up all the time against our state. I mean, we have a right as citizens, we have a responsibility as citizens to stand up to our state to ensure citizens' rights. We can make friends with Taliban, with Afghans. If they come and study here, we can be friendly with them. We can, show them how we live. We can hope that they will absorb our beliefs and go back and promote our beliefs there. That's the only way we can't go there and start telling them, I'm not going to teach until you let me teach women. And if I'm a man, I should be able to teach women too. We can't enforce our beliefs on them, but we can enforce our beliefs on our own state. And this is where we should spend our energies here.
I do spend quite a bit of energy here, but I also feel that whatever values that I try to uphold here, I ought to be consistent enough to try to uphold the people who are my friends and who share my values and who are being persecuted in other places. I have to defend people who are vulnerable and whose rights are being abused, wherever that happens, anywhere.
Okay, and I would hope that the way you do this would help them, not make it worse. Because sometimes when we try to help other countries and like on abortion rights or something, we just increase the level of repression. And that's the same with gay rights. You try and say, oh, you should let gays be free, and then you get a worse and worse crackdown. That's what's happened in Russia. It's gotten worse because of the Gay International that tries to promote a Western style way of promoting rights that is alien to another society. We've done more damage than help, and I don't want to see the things we do. I don't want to see your efforts make things worse.
Well, I really don't. You're saying that the people, the gays in Russia, and this is in an area that I know nothing about, but the rights of gays in Russia are being abused worse because the rest of the world has a movement in favor of gay rights.
Exactly.
Really.
And trying to force Russia and trying to import gay demonstrations and parades, gay pride. That's not going to work. It's not going to work in Africa. It's not going to work in China. It's not, I go all down the places where it's just stupid to try and perform in a Western, a very Americanized political thinking.
Well, then how does you tell me how cultural change does happen? Because globally,
very slow.
Globally, cultures do change.
They do.
And in general, very often they do change as a result of watching the behavior in other countries and emulating the trends that seem to take place in other countries. This occurs largely, it's always, obviously, Hollywood has had a big impact by distributing films indicating American culture. That spread American culture. And we know that that's how cultural change occurs within any one society. For example, it was I don't know anything about these things, but I believe that there was a television show about a gay guy living sharing an apartment with a straight woman or something, and it was a life about
in Russia,
humanized perspective on gay ways of living, and it changed public opinion greatly. So over time, these things communicated in public media and discourse do change public opinion. We know it happens within any society. We also know that it does happen across societies. And therefore, if we want to change, the rights of gays in Russia, which again, I'm sorry, I know nothing about, the way to do it would be exactly to emphasize that the rest of the world has quite a much more liberal perspective on the matter than seems to prevail in the official government position in Russia.
It's got to come from within. How did it start in the States? Gay rights started as a native movement. So it would be the same there, but it's not going to. Western media, Hollywood, is already seen as poisonous by a lot of the world. And Hollywood is not the way to change the world by
No, I think
importing Hollywood morality,
Hollywood,
lack of morality.
I think TV more than Hollywood would be exactly the best way to change the world, but they tend in general to change it in the wrong direction.
I know, that's what I'm saying. It goes in
But
the
it's
wrong
not that they're
direction.
ineffective. They're very effective, but they mostly have the negative influence. If
Right?
you and I had something to say about the kinds of shows that get produced, we might have some really valuable changes in the world. And
Yeah,
on some of those, we might even agree.
I think so. I think so. I think we're really just talking. The fine point is about people to people versus state. And I think that I would want to keep people to people, like the Toronto Volgograd. I would agree with the committee against you there, that you want to just work that in a way that is going to promote understanding and trust, not to start injecting your own opinions, which are going to start creating. But that's the only thing that I think we agree on peace. we both, and the world would be wonderful today, and we could do it overnight. We could cut we don't need any of these arms. Well, what country's threatening the U.S.? No country. It's got no enemies, and yet it's got the biggest military stockpile in the history of humanity. And it's growing every year. What enemies do Canada have? Our only enemy is the United States, because it will come in and seize us when they need it. And we can't do anything about that. So let's be Costa Rica. Every country should be Costa Rica. Get rid of your military.
We don't have to argue about that. But what I would like to ask you about is, since you have defended the communist regime of the Soviet Union as the old, what I call the dinosaurs in the Communist Party, which turns out they were a minority. I didn't know it at the time. I thought there were maybe 10%. I thought that the people who were pro change and pro democracy were maybe 10% of the party, but it turns out that they were much larger percentage of the party. Almost everybody, I understand, was really in favor of the same.
Not almost everybody.
Well, no. That's my friend Alexander Likotal, who is still Gorbachev's most, if closest aide, I would say, told me that I was mistaken in estimating that the party was 10% in favor of these changes that he represented. He said almost everybody in the party.
Well, it moved. The opinion moved radically within a year or two. It was just like the fall of the Taliban. Overnight, it's all over.
We're talking about times beforehand. And he said,
well, I was living there. I lived there 89, 90, 91, 92, 93. And I knew lots and lots of people. And there was very, very little, there was very little understanding about what was happening. It was just confusion. And I think people wanted more freedoms, but they didn't know how to get there.
Okay. Now let's talk about the current regime. Tell me what you think about the Putin government.
Well, it's czarist. It's basically, he's a czar. Putin has revived a kind of monarchical, but it's so corrupt with the oligarchs underneath him. They're like boyars, and in a way, he's kind of trying to use the old Peter the Great. He sees himself as Peter, and in many ways, he is. So I admire him in some ways. He's held the country together. He provides a positive image for people. People really feel they have some self-respect. Yeltsin was horrible. Yeltsin is a pro-American. It was a horrible time, and people really look back on that with distaste. But he's a czar. Czars, the people are afraid of them, and a lot of people, most of the people probably don't really like them, but they like the fact that the country is stable. So I'm becoming a monarchist in my old age. I think I really see this Republican democracy is it's too infected by capitalism. It's been so undermined that there's no real credibility left to Republican democracy. I don't know. I'm.
But I'm sorry, but do you think that the current Putin government is somehow not in any way capitalist? I mean, I'm not sure.
Well, it is. It is. It's bad.
Okay.
I don't like it at all, but it's at least stable, and it's got the trappings of monarchy, and even that has some value. That, I mean, why do these African countries, they set themselves up as king or emperor of Central African? I mean, yeah, what do they call it? They had to change the republic, but there is a mystique to monarchy that. And Prince Philip, he's going to be a good king, and I think Britain is good to keep its monarchy because it provides some kind of a sense of wholesome pride. If you have a good king, it's really great. If you have a good or a good queen,
there's a huge difference because the monarchs of Britain are absolutely non-political. They have no role in deciding the policies of the country, whereas Putin has a complete control over the policies of the country.
Yeah. So he's more the what do you call it? Well, it's an autocrat, I guess. It's not really or absolute monarchy. Yeah, I don't like it, and I don't know where it's going. I mean, I'm very worried that. It's just like Stalin or any king that, you have a lot of people around you. You make sure none of them are strong enough or intelligent enough to rival you. So that's a real problem. He's gotten that mentality that he's got to keep control and he's got to keep people in place. So I don't know what's going to happen. I am worried.
How would you feel about Navalny?
Oh, no, he's got no credibility there either. I mean, people like the fact that he's standing up to Putin, and I do too. Putin needs some credible, but he's not a credible political alternative. No, I think the communists are the credible political alternative, and they who knows how much fiddling was done at the ballot box. I'm sure there was some. But the fact that they are the strong second force, and as things deteriorate, they will only grow, and the mystique of Soviet Union is really increasing. More and more people, and even young people, a lot of young people are really saying we want to go back to the Soviet Union. This is this is like 60-70%, and it's just growing. So I think that eventually they're going to, I would be voting communist there. And, I met a lovely couple when I was biking here the other day and in the woods, and I heard the accent, the Russian accent. They're always out hiking. The Russians love to hike. So we had a lovely talk, and they immediately launched into, it was, Soviet Union was, we are so sad that it collapsed. It was they just went on and on. I had to finally leave because I'd spent the whole day, and it's hurts me because I feel the same as they do. And it was a great tragedy that collapsed, and how we're going to get back to it. Well, it's going to come. I'm sure that's the answer.
I in a way halfway agree with you because I regretted the fact that the Soviet Union collapsed. Yes, right. But I regretted it because I believed in Gorbachev so much, and I believed that the reforms that he was proposing, the new Union Treaty, which probably the next day would have been adopted.
He was shafted. He was undermined by Yeltsin in the U.S. They were right on his back.
But he's being blamed for the fall of the Soviet Union, which is the strangest thing. I mean, it was Yeltsin who destroyed the Soviet Union.
Well, who put Yeltsin in his place? Gorbachev. He promoted him.
In a way, he should have sent him to be ambassador to Peru when he had a chance.
Right at the start. I don't know if he ever had a chance. Once Yeltsin got into Moscow, it was like a bull in a china shop, and he started to. And I remember those rallies. I went to some of them with Yeltsin, and they were kind of creepy. There was a kind of licharads. There was a kind of ecstasy of and the shouting, and people were burning flags, and
Yes, but
there was a lot of hate that was developing. It was not a nice
it was
kind of
the strange thing, though, was it wasn't just the old guard, the old dinosaur part of the Communist Party that's switched, but it was also people who had been dissidents themselves, who'd been asking for democracy, who wanted, who supported Sakharov, etc. Those are the people.
They got shafted too.
Well, but they switched. They wanted most of those people. Remember what is it called? Democratic Russia, whatever the name of that movement was. It was so powerful at the time. Those people really they switched over and supported Yeltsin.
Memorial.
Well, Memorial, but I'm thinking of this other Democratic Russia or something was the name of this movement that was so powerful. They were all in favor of Yeltsin and opposed to Gorbachev because they thought he wasn't moving fast enough. And well, he wasn't achieving enough quickly, but it was a hell of a challenge to try to do.
No, I loved Gorbachev at the time, but I could see that he was out of control. He didn't have control. And as soon as Yeltsin started to take over, I wish the coup, more intelligent people could have been involved, but it was, the regime was, it was sclerotic at that point. So it had to collapse, I suppose, by the late 80s. It's very sad that, well,
what one would have wished for is just simply not having that coup, and within 2 days they had the chairs all set up for the meeting for the new Union Treaty to be adopted. They actually had the rows all set up for all the delegates to come and adopt a new constitution, which would have given rights to the nationalistic movements, but a much more constrained set of rights.
But I think it was a snowball by then, and Yeltsin wanted power. He would have just declared Russia as independent. I think whether or not that coup happened, the writing was on the wall by the late 80s. Very, very sad. So I guess that's a nice way to end, maybe, is that we're both agreed on that fundamental. And that maybe the communists are not the communists of old. If they do come to power, there are really good. The communists that tried to run in the last presidential election, Putin had him disqualified. He was head of a collective farm, but that had become reformed, and he was not an oligarch, but he was a successful businessman, farmer that would have been, and there are lots of these people. They will keep popping up. Putin will try and put them in jail, like Navalny. Navalny's not a credible one, but there are other ones. There are lots of other ones, and so I'm hopeful that in the long run, things will bounce back.
But it's really Putin who's trying to reconstitute the USSR
in his own way, but there'll be clashes. I'm more concerned about what's going to happen to the U.S. It's going right off a cliff. Mm-hmm. There's so many crazies in the U.S. Like all the South and that's where the world's problems.
Well, it's not just the U.S. though. It's the U.S. is leading the pack of populist movements everywhere, right-wing populist movements. I mean, I'm just tomorrow, maybe we'll have a conversation anyway, sometime soon, about what's going on in India, which is
horrible.
Well, we've used up our time, and I would say this has been stimulating, and it's fun, and it's hard. This is hard.
Well, and you're not denouncing me, and thank you for being open-minded enough. You're wonderful, and that's why I've loved you ever since we met. That I felt that there was an openness. You're a good intellectual, a real intellectual, not a dogmatist of any kind. So keep up the good work.
Thank you, and you're
an inspiration.
And we'll be more in touch in the future, I hope. All right, Great. Take care. Bye-bye. So good to talk with you, Eric. Bye-bye.